right, everybody, welcome back. We are diving deep today into The Veilguard, the new Dragon Age game.
Oh yeah, The Veilguard.
It seems like it's got everybody talking and not necessarily all saying the same thing.
For sure, a lot of buzz around this one.
You guys have given us 2 YouTube reviews to dig into this time.
Okay.
One from Worth a Buy and one from Heart FPS. And we are here to unpack all of it. The good, the bad, and, well, yeah, it's really a mix of praise and criticism, that's for sure. You know, one of the things that I thought was particularly interesting, and we'll talk about this more, but Wolfheart, who is a die-hard RPG fan, lowered the difficulty setting in the game for the first time ever. And get this, not because it was too hard, but because it got boring.
Wow, that's pretty unusual, right? I mean, you usually see, people change the difficulty to make the game more challenging or less challenging depending on their skill level. But to change it because it's boring, that's kind of a red flag, I think.
Yeah, definitely something we are going to want to dig into. But, okay, let's start with what both reviewers agreed on.
Right.
So, both of them, they were just blown away by how the game looks and sounds. They both praised the graphics and the sound design.
Yeah, I saw that too.
I mean, they were even raving about the hair physics.
It's funny how even with, all the advancements we have in games these days, good hair physics, it's still something that really gets people excited. Just adds to that sense of realism and immersion, right?
For sure. But we all know that a game can't just be pretty to look at.
Right. It has to play well, too.
So let's talk about the gameplay.
Right.
Worth a Buy, who loves their mage builds. They were just having a blast with the combat.
At least at first.
Right, at least initially.
Yeah.
They even called the mage abilities fantastic and said they made them feel really powerful.
I mean, that's great to hear, right? You want to feel like your character, especially a mage, has some serious oomph.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least initially, the combat really delivered on that.
Yeah, it did. But the question is, does it hold up over time? Does it have that depth that we expect from a Dragon Age game?
That's the million-dollar question. And that's actually where Wolfheart's perspective gets really interesting.
Oh, how so?
They enjoyed the combat at first, too, but they pretty quickly started to find it, well, kind of repetitive.
Repetitive, huh? So like button mashing, same moves over and over?
Basically, in fact, they even shared this anecdote where they actually won an entire fight with their eyes closed.
Wait, they fought a battle with your eyes closed?
That's what they said. And I mean, that's a pretty clear sign that the combat might not be as engaging as it could be.
Yeah, if you can win a fight with your eyes closed, maybe it's not exactly the most challenging or strategic combat system out there.
Right, and this actually ties into a bigger criticism that Wolfheart had about the game overall, which was this feeling that it was constantly underestimating the player's intelligence.
Underestimating their intelligence? What do you mean by that?
Well, for example, they talked about this one puzzle involving moving crystals.
Oh, I think I remember seeing that in their review.
Yeah, and they were really critical of it for being overly simplistic and repetitive. They said it felt like something out of a children's game, not an M-rated RPG.
Okay, so maybe not the most mentally stimulating puzzle design.
Right. And they said this hand-holding kind of extended to other aspects of the game, too, like the fact that your companions are invincible and they're constantly telling you what to do.
Huh. That's interesting. So it kind of takes away that sense of danger and player agency.
Exactly. It's like the game doesn't trust you to make your own decisions or figure things out on your own.
So are we sensing a trend here? Maybe a bit too much hand-holding, a bit too much simplification?
It seems like it, and that could definitely be a turnoff for players who are looking for a more challenging and immersive RPG experience.
Yeah, especially those who are familiar with the previous Dragon Age games, which are known for their complexity and, their willingness to let the player really dive deep into the world and the story.
Absolutely. And speaking of things that might make you raise an eyebrow.
Oh, this sounds juicy.
Let's talk about the tone of the game, because this is where things get really interesting.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Our 2 reviewers had wildly different but equally passionate reactions to the game's tone and writing.
Now that's what I call conflicting viewpoints. Tell me more.
All right, so Worth a Buy was absolutely enraged by what they perceived as forced sociopolitical messaging in the game. Like, they were using some pretty strong language to describe how it totally ruined the fantasy escape for them.
Wow, okay, so they felt like the game was pushing an agenda rather than just telling a story.
Exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum...
Wait, there's more?
Oh yeah, on the completely other end of the spectrum, Wolfheart actually found the tone too lighthearted.
Too lighthearted. For a Dragon Age game.
I know, right? They were comparing it to a Disney movie.
Like singing princesses and talking animals, kind of lighthearted.
Well, maybe not that extreme. But they pointed to things like, the overly helpful companion character and the fact that you can't even call someone an idiot in the game. They said it all felt very sanitized and inauthentic.
So we've got one reviewer who found the tone too heavy-handed and another who found it too childish.
That's the gist of it. And it really makes you wonder, who is this game even for? If it's trying to appeal to everyone, is it actually appealing to anyone?
Yeah, it's like that old saying, a jack of all trades is a master of none.
Exactly. And it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out in the long run. Will the Veilguard be able to find its footing, or will it be remembered as the Dragon Age game that tried to please everyone and ended up pleasing no one?
I guess only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, this is already shaping up to be one of the most talked about and debated games of the year.
For sure. And we are just getting started. We have a lot more to unpack.
I'm ready when you are.
So we've got this game that's either trying to beat you over the head with a message or comes across as kind of childish, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike, for sure.
No kidding. And then on top of that, there's this whole thing about the world design.
Ah, yes. The world design.
Both of our reviewers actually used the phrase studio set to describe the environments.
I think I noticed that too, now that you mention it. And it's interesting because Worth a Buy actually compared it to Elder Scrolls Online.
Which, for folks who haven't played that one...
Yeah, it's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game, or MMO for short.
Right, MMO. And it's known for having a huge world, but one that can sometimes feel, a little bit generic and lacking in personality.
Exactly. And this idea of a studio set kind of reinforces that feeling, right? It's like you're walking through a beautiful but artificial environment instead of a real lived-in world.
It's all surface and no substance, kind of.
Yeah, like they put all the effort into making it look pretty, but they forgot to make it feel real.
And speaking of feeling disconnected, what about the lack of interaction even within the hub area? That seems like a pretty big deal for an RPG.
Absolutely, especially one in the Dragon Age franchise. I mean,
Yeah.
Think about the hub areas in previous Dragon Age games. Like, they were bustling with life, right? You had all these interesting characters to talk to, side quests to discover, little details that made the world feel real and immersive.
Yeah, it's those little moments that really draw you in and make you feel like you're a part of something bigger,
Exactly. And when those moments are missing, it's easy to feel like you're just going through the motions, like you're not really connected to the world or the characters.
So it seems like the Veilguard might be dropping the ball a bit on that front.
It's possible. But let's not forget, we're only hearing from 2 reviewers here. And every player's experience is going to be different.
That's true. And speaking of different experiences, let's talk about those controls, because Worth a Buy, who is a big World of Warcraft player, as we know.
Yeah, a real MMO aficionado.
Exactly. They were really struggling with the control scheme in the Veilguard.
Oh, what didn't they like about it?
Well, they kept comparing it to World of Warcraft, which, as you said, is an MMO. And MMOs tend to have very complex control schemes with lots of different abilities and hotkeys and all that.
Yeah, you've got to have your fingers flying all over the keyboard to play those games effectively.
Right. And it seems like the Veilguard is trying to go for a more streamlined, console-friendly approach.
Which makes sense, given that it's being released on consoles as well.
But for someone like Worth a Buy, who's used to that level of control and customization, it just felt clunky and frustrating.
It's like they took a sports car and replaced the steering wheel with a joystick.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. So maybe this is another example of the game trying to appeal to a wider audience, but in doing so, alienating the hardcore fans.
It's possible. I mean, there's always that tension in game development between accessibility and complexity, right? Do you cater to the hardcore fans who want a deep, challenging experience? Or do you try to broaden your appeal by making things more streamlined and accessible?
And there's no easy answer because you risk alienating one group or the other no matter what you do.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure. Yeah. But hey, even if the combat and the world design aren't blowing everyone away, maybe the story can redeem the game, right? Dragon Age is known for its fantastic narratives, after all.
Well, about that, even the story seems to be a mixed bag, according to our reviewers.
Oh, no, really?
Yeah. Wolfheart found some of the individual scenes and characters to be engaging, but they also kept saying that the overall tone felt off.
Off? How?
Like too lighthearted. Remember how they kept comparing it to a children's movie?
Oh, yeah, I remember that. And it's especially jarring, given the whole M for mature rating.
It's like they're trying to tell a gritty, epic fantasy story, but with the emotional depth of a Saturday morning cartoon.
So another case of the game not quite living up to expectations.
It seems that way. And speaking of expectations, what about those multiple endings?
Ah, yes. Multiple endings. A classic RPG staple.
You'd think it would be a good thing, right? Gives players more agency, lets them shape the story in a meaningful way.
In theory, yes. But only if the choices you make throughout the game actually lead to those different endings. In a game like this, where there's so much hand-holding and streamlining, do those endings really feel earned?
That's a good question. It's like being given a choice between 5 different colors of paint, but then being told you can only paint inside the lines.
Yeah, the illusion of choice without the substance.
So let's take stock here. We've got potentially watered-down combat, a world that feels more like a stage set than a living, breathing space, and a story that might not be hitting all the right notes. What does this all mean for the Veilguard? Is it a complete disaster, or is there still hope?
Well, I think it's too early to say for sure. Remember, we're only getting a glimpse of the game through the eyes of these two reviewers.
True. And what they found disappointing, others might absolutely love.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is whether you enjoy the game.
Fair enough. So, even though the Veilguard might not be the groundbreaking RPG experience some folks were hoping for, it's definitely sparking some interesting conversations.
For sure. It's making us think about the direction of the genre, the balance between accessibility and complexity, and the role of storytelling in games.
And those are all important conversations to have, even if the game itself isn't perfect.
Absolutely. So should we dive into some of those bigger questions now?
Let's do it. All right, so we've talked about the good, the bad, and the questionable parts of the Veilguard.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag, isn't it?
It really is. But you know, one thing that keeps coming up, and it really got under Worth the Buy's skin,
Oh, yeah.
is that whole thing about propaganda in games. Like, they felt like the Veilguard was trying to push a certain agenda, and it kind of took them out of the experience.
Right.
Which, I mean, brings up a bigger question, right? Can games be entertaining and try to say something meaningful at the same time?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's something that people have been debating for years.
For sure. And there are definitely games out there that manage to pull it off, right?
Oh, absolutely. There are games that tackle some really complex, thought-provoking themes in a way that feels, natural and engaging.
Exactly. It's all about how it's done, right? Like, if the message feels like it's woven into the story and the characters, then it can actually enhance the experience.
Yeah, it's got to feel organic. It can't feel like the developers are just lecturing you or hitting you over the head with their own opinions.
Right. Like, think about a game like, I don't know, The Last of Us, for example.
Oh, great example.
It deals with some pretty heavy stuff, right?
Yeah, loss, grief, survival, the whole 9 yards.
But it does it in a way that feels, like, real and relatable, you know?
Totally. The message is there, but it's not being shoved in your face. It's something that you, as the player, kind of discover and grapple with on your own terms.
And that's what the Veilguard seems to be missing, right? That subtlety.
It sounds like it.
Like, it's trying to say something, but it's doing it in a way that feels clunky and forced, which is probably why Worth a Buy had such a negative reaction.
Makes sense. It's like, you go to a movie to be entertained, right?
Yeah.
And if the movie starts preaching at you, it can kind of ruin the whole experience.
Totally. And that's not to say that games can't have a message or explore important themes.
Right, not at all.
It's just got to be done in a way that feels authentic and respectful of the player's intelligence.
Exactly. And I think, when it comes to the Veilguard, that's where it seems to be falling short.
Yeah, it's trying to do too much at once, and it's not quite hitting the mark.
And that's a shame, because there's clearly a lot of potential there.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
the world is beautiful, the characters are interesting, the story has its moments.
But it just feels like they missed the landing a bit.
I think that's a fair assessment.
So where does that leave us? I mean, we've spent all this time dissecting the Veilguard, talking about its strengths and weaknesses.
We have.
And it's a game that's clearly sparking a lot of debate and discussion.
Yeah, people are passionate about this one, that's for sure.
They are. So is it a failure?
I wouldn't go that far.
Yeah.
I think it's more like a missed opportunity.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah, like they had all the ingredients for something truly special, but they didn't quite come together in the right way.
And I think that's actually a valuable lesson for both game developers and players, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, it reminds us that even with the best intentions and the most talented teams, sometimes things just don't click.
It happens. And that's okay.
Yeah, it's all part of the creative process, right? And it's through those missteps and experiments that we learn and grow.
And that's how we get those truly groundbreaking, unforgettable games that we all love, right?
Exactly. So even though The Veilguard might not be the masterpiece that some folks were hoping for, it's still a game worth talking about.
Definitely. It's making us think, it's sparking conversations, and it's pushing the boundaries of what games can be.
And at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about?
I think so.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. We had a blast exploring The Veilguard with you, even if the game itself wasn't always a blast to play.
Yeah. Well said.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of games. Until then, keep playing, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going.